Picture this. You've spent your entire life sacrificing for your family, your love, your time, everything, only to be thrown out like trash when you lose your job, left in a shelter, abandoned and forgotten. But just months later, your family watches in shock as you're not just surviving, but standing beside a billionaire, shaking his hand on national TV. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of unimaginable revenge and transformation. Stick with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. I had always prided myself on being a good person, someone who gave without expecting anything in return. For years, I worked tirelessly, putting my all into taking care of everyone around me. I had a modest home, a steady job, and a life that seemed fulfilling, albeit simple. My family, my daughter in particular, was my world. I dedicated every waking moment to making sure she had the best life possible, despite our circumstances. But life has a way of changing things when you least expect it. The moment my daughter Sarah told me they were going on a 2-week vacation, I thought nothing of it. She was excited. Her husband had planned it, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity for them to recharge. I didn't mind staying behind. In fact, I welcomed the quiet. It would be a chance to catch up on things that I had been putting off for years, like cleaning out the attic, organizing old photo albums, and maybe even getting some much-needed rest. It was around the 4th day of their vacation when I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it was just a mistake, or maybe I was overthinking things. Sarah hadn't called as often as she usually did, and when she did, her tone was distant, unusual for her. Her husband, Mark, seemed to be handling all the communication, and it left me feeling a little off-kilter. I didn't want to be a burden, though, so I brushed it off. By the time the 5th day came, I had received a call from Sarah, but it wasn't what I expected. Her voice was shaky, and there was a tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. "Mum, can you do me a favor?" she asked, her words tinged with something I couldn't put my finger on. "Can you go to the shelter? We won't be able to pick up your things like we planned." Confused, I asked her what she meant. That's when she told me that she and Mark had decided to leave me at the shelter for a while. They had a lot of things planned, and figured I would be fine there until they got back. They didn't think I would mind. After all, I'd always been so independent. Her words hit me like a brick. The shelter? I had no idea they had even made arrangements. But I didn't argue. I had raised my daughter to be strong and independent, and if that was what they needed to do, I couldn't stop them. I went along with it, thinking that this was just a temporary inconvenience, a minor setback in the grand scheme of things. Surely they would explain it better when they returned. As I stood in that shelter, waiting for the day they would return, I felt a sense of betrayal I couldn't shake off. The building was cold, uninviting, and filled with other people who were down on their luck. I tried to convince myself that I was only there temporarily, that Sarah and Mark would come back soon, and everything would return to normal. But the days dragged on. The lack of communication from them only deepened the wound in my heart. The little hope I had was starting to fade. And then, the unthinkable happened. One evening, as I sat quietly in the shelter, watching the news, I saw a familiar face, my own, but not in the way I had ever imagined. There I was, standing beside a well-dressed man, shaking his hand with a smile on my face. The news anchor was speaking about an event that had just taken place, a charity gala attended by none other than the billionaire tech mogul, David Harrington. The headline flashed across the screen: "Local woman meets billionaire at charity event." My mouth went dry as I stared at the screen in disbelief. How had this happened? How did I, a woman who had just been left at a shelter by her own daughter, end up shaking hands with one of the wealthiest men in the world? The story behind that moment was far more complicated than I could have ever imagined. But one thing was for sure: my life was about to change in ways I never could have predicted. The news story continued to play, and I sat there, frozen, as the camera panned over my face. I didn't recognize the woman they were showing. Yet it was me, undeniably so. I watched in stunned silence as the anchor explained how I had been invited to the gala by a non-profit organization that was raising funds for local shelters and food banks. The anchor's voice was warm and congratulatory, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, a sharp contrast to the calm, controlled voice coming from the television. I was overwhelmed by a swirl of confusion, anger, and disbelief. The last time I had spoken to Sarah and Mark, they were planning their vacation, not attending an event with a billionaire. But somehow, I had found myself in the midst of this glamorous world, a world so far removed from the reality I had been living for the past few days. How could they have left me at the shelter without telling me anything? I was furious, but I also couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride as I watched the footage of me interacting with David Harrington. There was no denying it. The woman on that screen looked confident, poised, and completely in control of her surroundings. But the woman sitting in that shelter, watching the footage, felt like a different person entirely. The truth was, I had been invited to the gala entirely by accident. A few days earlier, while I was volunteering at the shelter, a woman had approached me, offering a rare opportunity. She was a coordinator for a local non-profit organization, and she had been impressed by my work, particularly my efforts to help others despite my own struggles. Her words had been kind, but I hadn't realized at the time that she was offering me more than just recognition. She had invited me to a special event where I could mingle with high-profile individuals and raise awareness for causes I truly cared about. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. I figured I'd show up, maybe take part in a few speeches, and then return to my quiet life. But that was before I'd found myself in the midst of a lavish ballroom, rubbing elbows with the city's wealthiest residents. And it was there, at that very moment, that I had met David Harrington. He had approached me during the cocktail hour, his sharp blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity I wasn't used to. He had a reputation, one that preceded him in every room he entered. But he had been different with me, genuine, warm, and interested in what I had to say. We spoke for only a few minutes, but it felt as though we had known each other for years. His words were thoughtful, and his demeanor was disarmingly down to earth for a man of his stature. He was intrigued by my story, by the way I had spent my life caring for others, and for some inexplicable reason, he seemed to see something in me that others hadn't. That night, David had invited me to join him for dinner, where we continued our conversation about the challenges of life, the struggles of single mothers, and the power of resilience. It was surreal, and I felt like an imposter. But with every word I spoke, I felt a strange sense of purpose that had eluded me for years. There I was, sitting at a table with someone who had billions in the bank. Yet all he seemed to care about was the story of my life and the ways I had managed to keep going, even when everything around me had crumbled. When I left the event later that night, I couldn't help but reflect on the drastic shift in my life. I had gone from being a woman left alone in a shelter, discarded by my own family, to being someone whose life had crossed paths with one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the world. I wasn't sure what this encounter would mean for me, but one thing was clear. It had changed everything. As the days passed, I found myself grappling with my feelings of betrayal from Sarah and Mark, as well as the strange sense of empowerment I was experiencing from my unexpected connection with David. The dichotomy was jarring. On one hand, I was still processing the hurt of being abandoned, of being made to feel like I was nothing more than a burden in my own family's eyes. On the other hand, I was now entangled in a world that had always seemed far beyond my reach. I had tasted a life I never thought possible, one filled with wealth, privilege, and perhaps most unexpectedly, respect. And yet, the harsh reality of my family's abandonment still gnawed at me. How could Sarah and Mark have left me like that? How could they think so little of me, after all I had done for them. That night, as I lay in the uncomfortable bed at the shelter, a new determination began to settle in my chest. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story, not by a long shot. There was something more for me out there, something I had been blind to before. The bitterness I felt towards Sarah and Mark would remain, but I also knew that I couldn't let that bitterness consume me. I had spent too many years of my life trying to please them, sacrificing my own happiness in the process. It was time to stop living for others. It was time to live for myself. Little did I know that the next steps I took would be nothing short of transformative, leading me into a future where I would not only recover from the betrayal, but rise to heights I never thought I could reach. The journey was about to get a lot more complicated and a lot more exciting than I ever could have imagined. After the gala, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within me. The night I spent with David Harrington, talking about life, struggles, and resilience, felt like a dream. As soon as I left the event, I was bombarded by a mixture of emotions. The gala, the conversation, and especially that handshake. There was an undeniable shift. It wasn't just the encounter with David that had left an impression. It was the way I saw myself in a new light. I wasn't the same woman who had been abandoned at the shelter just a few days ago. I could feel the weight of my own potential slowly starting to press against the shell I had built for myself. But even with this sense of empowerment growing within me, I knew that the road ahead would be far from easy. Over the next few days, my mind was spinning. I had spent years living in the shadows of my family's expectations, constantly sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others. And now, here I was, recognized by a billionaire, invited into a world that had always seemed out of reach. David had shown me kindness and respect, unlike Sarah and Mark. But despite this new sense of possibility, I couldn't ignore the pain still churning inside me. They had left me. They had discarded me without a second thought. How could I forget that? How could I possibly forgive them? Still, I couldn't help but think about what David had said to me at the gala. "Your story is remarkable," he had told me, his voice genuine. "You've lived a life many people can only imagine, but you've always kept going. That kind of strength is rare, and it's something worth celebrating." His words stuck with me long after the event ended. And that's when it hit me. I had been so focused on surviving for everyone else that I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. I thought about how my life had been defined by my sacrifices for Sarah and Mark, always putting their needs above my own. But was that really the life I wanted? The more I reflected, the more I realized how little my family truly valued me. They had taken me for granted, used me as a means to an end. Sarah and Mark never truly saw me as anything other than a source of support, a woman who could give and give without asking for anything in return. I had been giving them everything I had for years, my love, my time, my energy. But they had taken it all and left me with nothing. The bitter truth was hard to swallow, but I couldn't deny it. I was done being the invisible woman who lived in the background, supporting everyone else without ever asking for help. I had been selfless for so long, but I had never been selfish enough to demand anything for myself. Until now. That morning, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. I was done waiting for others to validate me. I was done living in the shadows. I didn't need Sarah or Mark to give me permission to live my life. I didn't need them to tell me I was worthy. I had spent so many years living for them. But now, it was time to live for me. My time had come. With that determination growing in my chest, I made a decision. It was time to confront my past, to reclaim the life I had always wanted. No longer would I be the woman who was left behind. No longer would I be the woman who accepted being discarded. I was going to take control of my own story, and this time, I would write it the way I wanted. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had been avoiding for days. It was David's office. I had a new plan. I wasn't going to stay quiet any longer. My life was mine to control, and I was ready to step into a world that had always been just out of reach. David Harrington had shown me a glimpse of that world, but now it was time to see if it could be mine for good. The call to David's office was a turning point. It felt surreal at first, holding the phone in my hand, but I pushed the uncertainty aside. I had already spent too much of my life worrying about what others thought of me. Sarah, Mark, even the strangers who had judged me over the years. This time, it was about me. It had to be. The conversation went as expected. David's assistant, a calm and professional woman named Clara, answered the phone and asked how she could assist me. When I introduced myself, Clara seemed to recognize my name immediately, though I could sense she was cautious. After all, I wasn't exactly a well-known name in the circles David typically moved in. "I'd like to speak to Mr. Harrington, please," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'd like to discuss something important." There was a brief pause. Clara must have been running through the options in her mind, deciding how to handle an unexpected call like mine. But after a moment, she replied with a sense of warmth in her tone. "I'll schedule a time for you both to speak. Mr. Harrington is out of town, but he'll be back in a few days." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "That would be great. Thank you." The days leading up to that conversation felt like an eternity. I couldn't help but think about how my life had taken a complete 180-degree turn in the span of just a week. From being discarded by my own family to now preparing to speak with a billionaire, I felt both excitement and fear running through my veins. What did I even have to offer someone like him? But then again, I realized that this wasn't about what I could offer David. This was about what he could offer me, the opportunity to create a new path, one I had always dreamed of but never had the courage to pursue, the chance to break free from the chains of the past and build something truly my own. When David finally called, I was ready. His voice was just as warm as I remembered, and he didn't waste time getting to the point. "Margaret, I've been thinking about our conversation at the gala. You've been through a lot, and I can tell there's more to your story than what I heard that night. You mentioned helping a non-profit. I'd like to know more about how you've been involved with them." I took a deep breath. Here was my moment. I've worked at shelters, helped organize food drives, and spent years caring for those who couldn't help themselves. But lately I've realized that I can't just keep giving to others without first taking care of myself. I paused, searching for the right words. I've been undervalued for so long. I've given everything to my family, and it's led me nowhere but loneliness and disappointment. I've spent my life supporting others, and I've lost sight of my own dreams. David listened intently, and I could feel his attention, unwavering. "That's admirable, Margaret. But what are your dreams? What is it you really want?" His question hung in the air, and for a moment, I was speechless. What did I really want? I had spent so much of my life putting others first that I didn't even know what I needed anymore. But in that quiet moment, it became clear. "I want to help people, David, but I also want to build something for myself," I said, finally finding my voice. "I want to use the skills I've learned to make a difference, to be part of something bigger. But this time, I don't want to be overlooked. I want to be seen for who I truly am. Not as a mother, not as someone's caretaker, but as a woman who has her own worth, her own voice." There was a long silence on the other end. I wondered if I had said too much or too little. But then David spoke again, his voice measured but full of purpose. "I can see that you have a strong sense of purpose. I want to help you. How would you feel about taking on a more visible role with our charity?" The proposal took me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "What do you mean, exactly?" David went on to explain that he had been seeking someone who could connect with people at the grassroots level, someone who understood the real struggles of everyday life. He needed someone to help lead initiatives that focused on education, health, and community building. Someone who could inspire others to give back and make an impact in their own lives. He saw that potential in me. The offer was unexpected, but it felt right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me, not just for what I had done, but for who I was. David's offer was more than just a job. It was a chance to create something meaningful, something that would allow me to use my voice to empower others. "I'm in," I said without hesitation. David's response was immediate. "I knew you would be. We'll get everything started. Welcome aboard, Margaret. I think we're going to do great things together." As I ended the call, I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just transpired. I had started the week feeling like a discarded, forgotten woman, abandoned by my own family. Now, I was on the cusp of a new beginning, ready to take control of my life and build something that was mine, and mine alone. It wasn't just the offer to work with David Harrington that excited me. It was the opportunity to finally step into the life I had always dreamed of. No more living in the shadows. No more sacrificing myself for the sake of others. It was time to put myself first, to follow my own dreams, and to help others in a way that truly mattered. The future was wide open, and I was ready to seize it. As I began my new role with David's charity, I quickly realized that stepping into this new chapter was not going to be as simple as I had imagined. Though I had made the decision to embrace change, the reality of my situation hit me every time I had to walk into the sleek office or attend meetings with people who were far more polished and confident than I had ever felt. David's charity was a well-oiled machine, and I was tasked with leading outreach initiatives for underserved communities. The work was deeply fulfilling, but it also brought with it a steep learning curve. I found myself surrounded by people who had been working in the non-profit sector for years, people who knew how to navigate the complexities of fundraising, community building, and public relations. I was, by all accounts, an outsider, a woman who had spent decades working in the shadows, ignored by those closest to her, now thrust into the spotlight. But what I lacked in experience, I made up for in determination. The more I immersed myself in the work, the more I realized that I had something unique to offer, something that none of these professionals could replicate. I had lived through hardship. I had seen what it was like to struggle and sacrifice for the sake of others. I had a voice that resonated with the people we were trying to help, and I knew what it meant to give everything when there was nothing left to give. Despite my growing sense of purpose, the feelings of isolation didn't go away immediately. I spent most of my time working in the office, meeting with the charity's board members and planning events. But something was always missing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still carrying the weight of the past with me. The betrayal from Sarah and Mark continued to sting, and every time I saw a family together, I couldn't help but feel the emptiness of being cut off from my own. Then came a phone call that changed everything. It was a week into my new position when I received an unexpected call from Sarah. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of regret. "Mum, we need to talk," she said, her words tinged with uncertainty. "I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I've been thinking about everything." I felt a sharp pain in my chest at the sound of her voice. It was as if the air in the room had suddenly been sucked out, leaving me breathless. For a moment, I was speechless. I had spent so long convincing myself that I didn't need them anymore. But hearing Sarah's voice, full of hesitation and regret, sent me reeling. "Why now?" I asked, keeping my tone steady despite the emotions threatening to rise. "Why after everything?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know what I was thinking. When we left you at the shelter, She faltered, her voice cracking slightly. "I thought it was just temporary, but I can't believe how long it's been. I'm sorry, Mum. We should never have treated you that way." Her words hit me like a wave. For a moment, I was silent, processing the apology I hadn't expected. Part of me wanted to scream at her for everything they had done to me, how they had discarded me when I needed them most. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite the hurt, softened. "I've been doing a lot of thinking too, Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And I've come to realize that I can't go back to what we had. I've been through too much to just pretend like everything's fine. I can't keep sacrificing myself for you and Mark." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I wondered if she was going to hang up, if the distance I had created between us was too much to repair. But then she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I want you to know that we've made a mistake. We've hurt you, and I don't expect you to just forgive us overnight. But I want to make things right, Mom. I do. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, please tell me." I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and an unexpected sense of relief. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe this was the opportunity to rebuild, not just for me, but for her too. But as I stood there, silently processing, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to the woman I had been. "I'm doing fine, Sarah," I said, my voice softening just slightly. "But I'm not coming back. I've made my peace with that. I'm living for myself now. I'm doing something meaningful, and I'm not going to let anyone, especially you or Mark, pull me back into the shadows." I could feel her hesitation through the phone, but I didn't want to wait for the words that would come next. I had spent my whole life giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, forgiving and forgetting. But this time, I wasn't willing to compromise my newfound strength. "I have to go now," I said, cutting the conversation short. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." As I hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The moment had come to let go of the past and embrace my new life. I had learned the hard way that family wasn't always a source of unconditional love. Sometimes it was a source of pain. And in order to move forward, I had to accept that. I took a deep breath, gathered myself, and turned my attention back to the work in front of me. There was so much to be done, so many lives to impact. I wasn't just a woman who had been left behind. I was a woman who had built a future for herself. And now, I was going to make sure that future was everything I had ever dreamed of. The days after my conversation with Sarah were some of the most challenging and transformative of my life. Part of me felt relief at finally standing up for myself, while another part of me, deep down, yearned for the family I had sacrificed so much for. But I knew, deep in my heart, that I could no longer allow myself to be tethered to the past, to the hurtful people who only saw me as a tool for their own gain. I had given everything for them, and now it was time to give something to myself. As I dove deeper into my new role at the charity, the work itself became a means of distraction. It wasn't just a job, it was my lifeline, a new beginning. The first few weeks were intense, and though I had an underlying sense of uncertainty, the excitement of forging something new carried me through. I worked tirelessly, planning community outreach programs, organizing fundraising events, and speaking with individuals who needed help. It was exhausting, but every moment I spent doing the work filled me with purpose. One afternoon, as I walked through the shelter where I used to volunteer, I met a young woman named Clara who had recently moved into the area. She was shy but determined, working part-time at the shelter and attending school in the evenings. Her story reminded me of my younger self, the woman who had been unappreciated, who had poured her heart and soul into helping others, but was left empty. As Clara shared her hopes and dreams, I saw a glimpse of the woman I used to be. Someone who had once believed in the goodness of people. Someone who had tried to make a difference no matter the cost. It was Clara's story that reignited something within me. I wasn't just doing this for myself anymore. I was doing it for people like her. She didn't have the privileges I was now beginning to enjoy. She was still stuck in a cycle of uncertainty, just as I had once been. I realized that my purpose was more than just healing the rift with Sarah and Mark. My purpose was to continue helping others, to break the cycle of neglect and provide opportunities for people who needed them. Every step I took in this new chapter was a step toward creating a more meaningful life for myself, but it was also about creating a ripple effect of change in the lives of others. Clara became a small part of that mission. I took her under my wing, helping her with schoolwork and offering guidance where I could. In return, she reminded me of the power of resilience, of the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed. Her presence helped me heal a little more each day, and I began to see that my work at the charity and the people I met along the way were filling the void that Sarah and Mark had left behind. But even as I focused on the work and the people I was helping, there were moments when the pain from my past crept back in. The holidays were always a tough time. I would hear stories of families reuniting, spending quality time together, and I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if Sarah and Mark had treated me differently. What if they had realized how much I had given up for them? What if they had shown the slightest bit of appreciation? Still, I had learned something important in this journey. The love I had given, the sacrifices I had made, didn't need to be validated by them anymore. I wasn't waiting for their approval. I was living for myself. And in that, I found peace. It was on a chilly December morning that I received a phone call that would turn my world upside down. I was sitting at my desk, sipping coffee, and reviewing community outreach programs for the next quarter when the call came in. It was David's assistant, Clara, with an unexpected offer. "Margaret, I have some news. David would like to meet with you tomorrow afternoon. He has an opportunity he wants to discuss, and he believes it could be a life-changing offer for you," Clara said, her voice a mixture of excitement and formality. My heart raced. A life-changing offer? What could it possibly be? I had been with the charity for a few months now, and while I was certainly making an impact, I hadn't expected anything like this. I had no idea what David had in mind, but I couldn't deny the thrill of anticipation bubbling inside me. "Of course, I'll be there," I replied, trying to maintain composure. The following day, I walked into David's office, the sleek glass building reflecting the sunlight in a way that made it seem almost otherworldly. Clara greeted me warmly and led me to a large conference room where David was already waiting. His presence was commanding, but there was something welcoming about him, as if he genuinely cared about the people he worked with. "Margaret, it's great to see you again," David said with a smile. "I've been following your work closely. You've done remarkable things for the charity, and I think you're ready for the next step." I sat down across from him, intrigued and, to be honest, a little nervous. "What do you have in mind?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. David's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I've been thinking about your potential and the impact you've already made. I want to offer you the chance to lead a new initiative, a project that will not only change the lives of people in our community, but also provide you with the resources and recognition you deserve." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. "I'd like you to become the director of a new outreach program that will focus on empowering women in underserved communities. We'll provide funding, mentorship, and resources to help them get back on their feet, just as you've done with Clara and others here. It's a big responsibility, but I know you're the right person for the job." The offer took me by surprise, and for a moment, I couldn't find the words. I had worked so hard to get to this point, but this was something different. This wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to build something that could truly change lives, including my own. I don't know what to say," I stammered, feeling a lump form in my throat. "This is more than I ever dreamed of." David smiled, sensing my awe. "Take your time to think about it. But I want you to know that I believe in you. You've already proven that you have the heart and the drive to make a difference. Now, I'm giving you the resources to do it on a larger scale. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This was the opportunity I had always wanted, the chance to create something meaningful, to help people in a way that would leave a lasting impact. It was everything I had hoped for, and more. And in that moment, I knew that my journey wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about using my experiences to help others, to give them the tools and the support they needed to rise above their circumstances. I had found my purpose, and now it was time to run with it. As I began to settle into my new role as the director of the outreach program, I felt both a surge of excitement and an underlying sense of apprehension. This was the opportunity I had longed for, but now it was real. There were new responsibilities, new faces, and a mountain of tasks that lay ahead of me. But I was determined not to let fear hold me back. After all, I had survived much harder battles than this. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. There were meetings to attend, budgets to review, and partnerships to establish. I found myself speaking with community leaders, local businesses, and other nonprofits, all while balancing the administrative duties of running a program of this scale. I quickly realized that I had a lot to learn, but I was eager to absorb everything. One of my first priorities was assembling a team. I needed people who were not just skilled, but passionate about helping others, people who believed in the vision of the program and were willing to work tirelessly to make it a success. I spent long hours interviewing candidates, speaking with former colleagues, and reaching out to professionals in the field who could help guide me. Slowly but surely, I began to build a team of people who shared my commitment to empowering women. There was Maria, a single mother who had experienced the struggles of raising children on her own, and Jake, a former social worker, who had a deep understanding of the challenges faced by underprivileged communities. We worked together to develop a program that would provide not only financial support, but also emotional and practical resources for women looking to break free from cycles of poverty, abuse, and neglect. But there were also moments of doubt. As the program began to take shape, I found myself questioning whether I was truly prepared to lead such an initiative. I had spent so many years following the needs of others, always giving without asking for anything in return. Now I had to take charge, make decisions, and face the challenges that came with leadership. There were moments when the weight of it all seemed overwhelming, and I questioned if I was capable of carrying it. But as I sat in the quiet moments of reflection, I remembered the woman I had become, the woman who had been left behind, but had risen to rebuild herself. This program wasn't just about helping others, it was about me, too. It was about taking back my life and showing others that they could do the same. I had spent far too long being invisible, and now I was ready to take my place in the world. I couldn't let doubt stop me from fulfilling my purpose. With each meeting, each new partnership, and each success, I grew more confident. The women who came through the program were raw with emotion, each carrying their own stories of struggle. But they were also strong, resilient, and full of potential. I saw reflections of myself in them, the same strength, the same determination, the same will to survive. And with every woman who found hope and opportunity through our efforts, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The more I saw the impact we were making, the more I realized how much I had transformed. I had gone from a woman who had been discarded, abandoned by the very people she had loved and raised, to a leader who was making a real difference in the world. My life was no longer defined by my past. It was defined by the choices I made today and the legacy I was creating for the future. As the program began to gain momentum, the real test of my leadership came in the form of a crisis. It happened just a few months after the program had launched. A local business, one of our key sponsors, suddenly pulled out of its commitment to provide financial backing. The reason they gave was vague, citing unforeseen circumstances, but I knew better. We had been warned about this possibility. The economy had been in a downturn, and many businesses were tightening their belts. I felt a knot in my stomach as I read the email from the sponsor's representative. The money they had pledged was crucial to our continued operations. Without it, we would have to scale back the program, delay services, and possibly turn away women who were depending on us. For a brief moment, I felt a rush of panic, but I quickly suppressed it. Panic wouldn't solve anything. What mattered now was action. I immediately gathered the team to discuss the situation. Maria, Jake, and I sat in the conference room strategizing. We could feel the weight of the decision hanging over us. This was our first real challenge. What if we couldn't recover from it? What if the program we had worked so hard to build fell apart? "I think we need to get creative," Maria said, breaking the silence. "We've built strong relationships with other local businesses. Maybe we can tap into those partnerships and secure new sponsors? We can't afford to sit back and wait." I nodded, grateful for her quick thinking. Maria had always been resourceful, and her suggestion was exactly the kind of solution we needed. We spent the next few days reaching out to other businesses, pitching our program, and the impact it was having on the community. We also started a fundraising campaign to bring in additional support, hoping to fill the gap that the business sponsorship had left. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the campaign results, I received a call from David Harrington. It had been a few weeks since we last spoke, but his voice was familiar and comforting. "Margaret, I heard about the situation with your sponsor," he said. "I want to help. Our company would be willing to match your fundraising efforts, dollar for dollar, up to $500,000. My heart skipped a beat. David's offer was nothing short of a miracle. It wasn't just the financial support, it was the endorsement. To have someone as influential as David believing in us, willing to back our efforts, made everything feel possible again. "We'll make it through this," I said, my voice steady despite the flood of emotions coursing through me. "Thank you, David. You don't know how much this means to us." David's response was simple, but powerful. "I believe in you, Margaret. I've seen what you're capable of. Let's make sure this program continues to grow and reach even more women." With David's backing, we were able to not only recover from the setback, but exceed our fundraising goals. The sponsorships we secured after David's endorsement were more than enough to keep the program running at full capacity. We were able to expand our outreach, bring in more volunteers, and offer even more resources to the women we were serving. This crisis, which had initially seemed like a catastrophic blow, turned into one of the most defining moments of my leadership journey. It taught me the importance of resilience, adaptability, and the power of collaboration. I couldn't do it alone, but together with my team and with the support of people like David, we had turned a setback into a triumph. And just like that, I realized that the challenges we faced were never meant to break us. They were meant to show us how much we could grow, how much we could achieve, and how much power we had to create change. And this was only the beginning. The success of the fundraising campaign brought an undeniable sense of relief, but it was more than just a financial victory. It was a testament to how far we had come, not just as an organization, but as a community. The ripple effect of our work began to take shape in ways I hadn't anticipated. What started as a small idea, a humble initiative to help a few women, had now blossomed into something larger, a movement. We saw the transformation in the women we served. As more women joined the program, the stories that poured in were heart-wrenching, yet filled with hope. I remember one woman, Maya, who had been in an abusive relationship for years. When she first came to us, she was terrified to speak, her voice barely a whisper. But as she participated in our support groups and received help from our mentors, she began to open up. Over time, she grew more confident. Maya eventually enrolled in a job training program through the program, and not long after, she found stable work. She was not just surviving, she was thriving. Then there was Carla, a woman in her late 40s who had spent the majority of her life raising her children while her husband worked. When he unexpectedly passed away, she found herself thrust into the workforce for the first time. Carla had no experience, no resume, and no connections. But through our program, she gained the skills and confidence to land a full-time job. I remember the moment she came to the office, her eyes wide with excitement, holding her first paycheck. It wasn't just money, it was proof that she could take control of her life again. These were the moments that fueled my passion, the moments that reminded me why I had made this decision to step into leadership. I wasn't just helping women find jobs or financial stability. I was helping them reclaim their sense of worth, their self-respect. Each success was a victory, not just for them, but for me as well. The program wasn't just changing their lives, it was changing mine too. The community around us began to take notice. Local media outlets started to pick up on the success of the program, and David's company continued to be a steadfast partner, offering further sponsorships and resources. It wasn't just the women who were being impacted. The entire city began to recognize the power of what we were doing. Our program wasn't just helping women survive, it was helping them build their futures. And in doing so, it was rebuilding the fabric of our community. But with all this success, I knew there would always be challenges. There were still women out there who hadn't yet heard about our program, women who were still suffering in silence, too afraid or ashamed to ask for help. My focus began to shift toward reaching even more of these women, to expand our reach, and to create even more opportunities for those who needed us the most. But as much as I was focused on helping others, I was still struggling with the emptiness left behind by my family. Despite all the progress, the outreach, and the positive changes in my life, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their abandonment. It was the quiet moments, those alone times in my office or at home, where the pain would creep back in. I had spent so many years giving everything to them, and now they were nowhere to be found. In these moments, I found myself reflecting on what had brought me here. My own resilience, yes, but also the people who had supported me. It was Clara, Maria, Jake, and David who had truly been there for me. They had seen something in me that I had long overlooked in myself. And now, it was my turn to pay that forward. I had built a new life for myself, and every day felt like a small victory. I had a purpose, a mission, and a team that supported me. But there were still days when the shadows of my past loomed large. No matter how much I had accomplished, no matter how many lives we had touched, I couldn't escape the deep, unresolved feelings toward my family. The emptiness, the hurt, they were still there, lurking just beneath the surface. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found myself at home, scrolling through old photos. I stumbled upon a picture of Sarah and me when she was just a little girl. We were at the beach, the sunlight casting a warm glow over her face as she ran toward me, laughing. I had always been the one to protect her, to ensure she had everything she needed. Seeing that photo made the abandonment sting even more. The woman in the picture didn't deserve what had happened. I didn't deserve it. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there, looking at me with a mixture of hurt and confusion. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but there was no more space in my life for guilt. I had spent too many years feeling guilty for wanting something more than what he wanted for me. "I don't know how to make you understand," Paul said, his voice softening. "I don't know how to make you see that what we had was enough. I didn't need all of this business stuff. I just wanted us to be a family." I took a deep breath. We were a family, Paul, but we weren't a happy one. And that's what I've been trying to tell you all along. I've given everything to this family, and I don't regret that. But I've reached a point where I need more. I need to feel like I'm living for myself, not just for the expectations that have been placed on me. Paul's eyes softened for a moment, and I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't understand why I was making the choices I was. He hadn't changed, and I knew now that I couldn't change him. I'm not asking for your approval, Paul, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. But I do want you to understand that I'm doing this for me, and I won't apologize for it. He stared at me for a long time, and I could see the struggle inside him. He didn't know how to deal with the woman I had become. Strong, independent, determined. For so long, I had been the one who folded, the one who compromised, the one who put everyone else first. But now, that woman was gone. I guess I don't know who you are anymore, Paul finally said, his voice quiet, almost resigned. You don't need to, I said, my heart heavy but resolute. Because now, I know exactly who I am. The next few months were a blur of activity. I spent every waking hour working on the business, learning everything I could about the new venture I had entered. The deal that seemed so risky in the beginning had already started to show results. My investment had already grown by a significant percentage, and I was beginning to feel the satisfaction of seeing the fruits of my labor. Angela, my business advisor, was thrilled with the progress. You're doing great, Margaret. This is exactly what I've been telling you. You've got the drive and the vision to make this work. I knew you had it in you. I couldn't help but feel proud of myself. For once, I wasn't relying on anyone else's approval or validation. The success I was experiencing was entirely mine. This wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of standing on my own, making bold decisions, and succeeding without having to play by anyone's rules but my own. But even as the victories stacked up, I couldn't escape the feeling that Paul was lurking in the background, trying to figure out how to win me back. Every once in a while, he would send me a text or leave a message, but they were always filled with guilt and manipulation. He would say things like, "I miss you," or "We were good together," as if those words would suddenly make me forget everything that had happened. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not anymore. Instead, I focused on building my own future. I started planning for expansion in my business, looking into new opportunities that could push me even further into the world I had always dreamed of. I was in control. I was no longer living in the past, no longer waiting for someone else to give me permission to live my life. And with each step forward, I could feel the weight of the years I had spent sacrificing for others lift from my shoulders. I had finally found my place. Just when everything seemed to be falling into place, my past came knocking. It wasn't Paul this time, but rather Susan. His mother, my former mother-in-law. I hadn't heard from her in months, and honestly, I had no intention of ever speaking to her again. But one afternoon, as I was sitting in my new office, getting ready for an important conference call, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she stood. Susan, with her impeccable clothes and haughty expression. The same woman who had never once treated me with the respect I deserved. The woman who had always seen me as nothing more than a caretaker, someone who was expected to serve the family without question. "Margaret," she said, as if she had all the right in the world to show up unannounced, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." I stood in the doorway, not inviting her in. "What do you want, Susan?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She didn't seem to mind the cold reception. "I just wanted to talk. I thought we could have a civilized conversation. You know, now that you're no longer part of the family." I felt my patience starting to wear thin, but I kept my composure. "I'm no longer part of the family because I chose not to be. I've made it very clear to everyone that I'm not going to live by your rules anymore." Susan sighed, as if she were dealing with an unruly child. "You don't understand, Margaret. You've made a huge mistake. Paul and Ethan are both suffering. They don't know what to do without you. You're their family, and they need you." I raised an eyebrow. "You're really here to guilt me into coming back, aren't you? You think I'll just drop everything and return to that life?" Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not asking you to return to being his wife. I'm asking you to be a mother. To be a real mother to Ethan, who is now struggling with everything that's happened. He's lost without you, and I'm afraid he's not going to be able to handle it much longer." For a moment, I considered her words. Ethan, my adopted son, had always been the center of my world. I had raised him, fought for him, and sacrificed everything for him. But the reality was clear. He was no longer the boy I had once known. He had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who would throw me away in a heartbeat if it suited him. "I've done everything I could for Ethan, Susan," I said, my voice steady. "I gave him my heart, my time, my money. But there comes a point when enough is enough. I'm not going to let him, or anyone else, manipulate me into feeling guilty for wanting a life of my own." Susan's face hardened. "You'll regret this. You'll see. Family is everything. And when you're alone, with no one to stand by you, you'll come crawling back to us. You always do." I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "No, Susan, I won't. This is the life I've chosen, and it's a life where I'm finally living for myself. I won't let you or anyone else drag me back into a life of self-sacrifice and guilt." Without another word, I closed the door, leaving Susan standing on the other side. I felt a mix of anger and relief. I knew she wouldn't be the last person to try to pull me back into the past, but I also knew that I couldn't let it happen. I had come too far to turn back now. The next few days felt strangely quiet. There were no more messages from Paul or Susan, no more phone calls from Ethan. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe, like I was no longer tethered to the past, no longer haunted by the weight of old expectations. I focused entirely on my business, making decisions that were bold and purposeful. My investments continued to grow, and I had already secured additional properties, some of which I planned to develop into art galleries or boutique businesses. I was no longer just a woman with an inheritance. I was an entrepreneur in my own right, building something sustainable and meaningful. But, as always, the past had a way of creeping in. One afternoon, as I was preparing to leave my office to meet Angela for a final meeting about the next phase of the investment, I received an unexpected text. It was from Ethan. "Mum, I know things have been tough, and I've made a lot of mistakes. But I'm reaching out because I don't know who else to turn to. I need your help. Please, I'm sorry." My heart clenched as I read the message. I hadn't heard from Ethan in months, not since everything had blown up. He had been so angry, so full of resentment after I had cut ties with him. And now, suddenly, he was asking for my help. I didn't respond right away. I needed to think. The last time I had given in to his manipulations, it had nearly cost me everything. But as much as I wanted to help him, I knew deep down that I couldn't. I had given him my heart, my savings, my time, but that was no longer my responsibility. I had spent years enabling him, allowing him to take advantage of my love and sacrifices. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. I texted him back, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before I finally typed out my response. "Ethan, I've already given you everything I could. It's time for you to take responsibility for your own life. I'm sorry, but I can't help you anymore. I'm done." The moment I sent the message, a wave of calm washed over me. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't sad either. I felt free. It wasn't that I didn't care for Ethan anymore. It was that I had finally realized that I couldn't keep living my life for him or anyone else. My decision to walk away from him and Paul wasn't about rejecting them. It was about accepting myself. It was about understanding that I deserved a life of my own. I walked out of my office, ready to meet Angela, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I had no idea what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. It was mine to shape, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. A month passed, and I settled more comfortably into my new life. The business was thriving, and I was starting to see the fruits of my hard work. I had finally surrounded myself with people who valued me for who I was, not for the roles I was expected to play. Angela had become more than just my business advisor. She had become a friend, someone who truly understood my drive and ambition. One afternoon, as I sat in my office overlooking the expansive view of my property, I reflected on the journey I had taken to get here. From the woman who had been lost in the shadows of her marriage, to the woman who now stood in her own power, making decisions, building a future. I had come so far. It had taken courage, yes, but it had also taken a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truth. I had spent too many years living for others, and it was time to live for myself. The phone rang, and I answered without hesitation. It was Angela. "Margaret, I've got fantastic news," she said, her voice full of excitement. "The company we invested in? It's taken off. Your investment has tripled. You're in the big leagues now." A smile spread across my face as I listened to her explain the details. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that I had made this happen, that I had taken control of my destiny and created something for myself. As the conversation ended, I sat back in my chair, letting the news sink in. For the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace with who I was and where I was going. I had built my success on my terms, and nothing, no one, could take that away from me. I looked out the window, seeing the future unfolding before me. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a woman who had reclaimed her power, her identity, and her life. And that was worth more than any amount of money, any business deal, any house. The road ahead wasn't going to be without its challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I had finally become the woman I was always meant to be. And that woman wasn't going to let anyone, not even the ghosts of the past, stand in her way.